Welcome to Bridging the Bay, live from Fabre Framework Studios, the podcast where we bring together voices, ideas, and insights that shape the future of real estate in our communities across Tampa Bay. I'm your host, Quan Rimmer, and today we're diving into a topic that impacts every homeowner, realtor, and business in our region, and that's property taxes. Joining us is Hillsborough County Property Appraiser Bob Henriquez. Bob has been a leader in public service for many years and plays a vital role in helping residents understand property assessments, exemptions, and how shifting values affect our tax landscape. In this conversation, we'll explore the role of the Property Appraiser's Office, the factors driving property tax changes, exemptions every homeowner should know about, and even the statewide conversations around property tax reform. Whether you're a realtor advising clients, a homeowner looking for clarity, or simply curious about how property values and taxes shape our community, you won't want to miss this discussion. Bob, thank you for coming.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here.
I'm glad. So, Bob, many of our listeners know your title,
Right.
but not everyone truly knows your story. So, what inspired you to go into public service?
Well, my family, there's a history of public service. Long before I was born, my great-grandfather was the last mayor of West Tampa. Many people don't know that West Tampa, literally 100 years ago, this year, was annexed into the city of Tampa. But prior to that, it was its own city.
Wow.
And my great-grandfather was the last mayor of West Tampa. My cousin Lou Delapart was a state senator, and I was always fascinated with his service and what he did for the community. And obviously, when he descended down from Tallahassee when I was a little kid, it was this big deal. But honestly, I came from a very humble background. My father had a small painting business, and was first in my family to graduate from college. But I always understood that it was important to give back, that you don't do anything alone in this life. So it was really about giving back to the community. It ultimately led to elected service. But I think I've always been interested and understood that this is a wonderful community, and you don't do anything alone. Whether it be a teacher, a coach, a parent, a grandparent, a clergyman, somebody has contributed to your success. So it's really been about public service, not necessarily elected or politics, but more about just giving back to the community in whatever ways that I could.
Love that. Can you walk us through what your office actually does and
Okay.
does not do?
Well, I think that's probably what we don't do is probably the most important thing to some extent. But literally, our charge is to assess the value of all of the property in Hillsborough County, some 570,000 or so properties of all property types, commercial, industrial, residential, and what have you. And also evaluate any exemptions that people may apply for the purpose of real estate or property taxes.
Okay.
And then what we don't do is that we don't raise or lower your taxes directly. The tax rates are set by the taxing authorities, like Hillsborough County, City of Tampa, School Board, etc. And we don't collect the taxes. That's the tax collector. That's our sister agency. So it's important for folks to know that. So if people have questions about their valuations, their assessments, or what exemptions they may qualify for, or one that perhaps we said they didn't qualify for, those are the questions that should be directed to us. Come here in November when tax bills go out, that's a different story. But we don't send actual bills. I get that all the time. I received a bill from you. No, you didn't. You may have received a notice of proposed taxes that showed, as we see it, our opinion of what the value of your property is. But the tax bills themselves go out in November from the tax collector.
Gosh, that's good to know. So listen, for our realtors, that advise clients, can you break down the difference between just value, assessed value, and taxable value?
Yeah, so the just value is the overall value. Again, we're valuing properties for the purposes of real estate or property taxes, okay? So just value would be the overall value as we see it, minus cost of sale and those kinds of things. So sale prices are different than actual just value. But that's the overall value of the property.
Okay.
Once you remove if the Save Our Homes cap, if you're a capped property or homesteaded property, so you're protected by the Save Our Homes cap, then becomes your assessed value, and then the taxable value is once you remove any exemptions that you may have, like the homestead exemption, all those kinds of things. So ultimately, once you remove Save Our Homes cap and any other exemptions you may have, that ultimately is what is taxable on the property.
Good. What are the most common property tax exemptions that homeowners in Hillsborough County may not be taking full advantage of?
Well, we hope that they're all taking advantage, if possible, if it's their primary residence, of the homestead exemption.
Homestead.
That's the most common and probably the best exemption in terms of a savings on your property taxes. Otherwise, there's any number of other exemptions out there. Obviously, if you're a senior, depending on the value of your home, there's an exemption, and there's what's called the super seniors. If your income is below the national poverty line, then you would qualify for that one. That's a big one. A lot of times seniors don't know that they qualify for that. There's a number of other exemptions for people that have disabilities of one type or another, personal disability, blind disability. There's a number of other exemptions that deal with folks that are either first responders or surviving spouses of first responders or the folks in the military that keep us safe as well. But I would think that really the homestead exemption is the one that we want to make sure folks are aware of and that they file for it timely if indeed the property is their primary residence. And we do whatever we can to do outreach to, especially with underserved communities, whether it be seniors and others that may or may not understand or know what they qualify for, because it's important that folks, if they qualify for an exemption for us, we don't want them to ultimately have to pay 1 cent more than they should in property taxes if they qualify for something legally.
Yes. So I think we've all heard of homestead exemption. You brought it up a couple of times. So
Sure.
how exactly does that homestead exemption work in practice, and how does it interact with other exemptions?
Well, you can stack exemptions depending on how many you qualify for. That's one question we get. Well, if I get this exemption, can I get another one?
Yeah.
Well, if you have say you're a widower, that there's an exemption for that. That can be in addition to your homestead exemption.
Okay.
The homestead exemption is based on your primary residence. So if you're a homeowner and it's your primary residence, which means that you deem it as your primary residence. It doesn't mean that you have to be there 50% plus 1 day.
Yeah.
You can have more than one property or home within the state of Florida. It has to be within the state of Florida. You can only have one, and it has to be your primary residence. You have to have taken ownership or have, as of January 1st of a given year, to be homesteaded in the subsequent year. And with the homestead exemption, what you receive is up to $50,000 off your assessed or your just value or your assessed value of the property. And then you're also covered by the Save Our Homes cap, which is in some ways more important because that now says that your assessed value at any given year can't go up more than 3% or inflation, whichever is less. And the genesis of that was back when property values really started to rise, a couple decades ago. Then people were, quote, being taxed out of their home, particularly seniors and savers, because it used to be that your just market value and your taxable value were basically the same thing. So if your value went up 10% in a year, your taxes could go up 10%. The Save Our Homes cap protects homeowners from getting hit by those years when, and as we know, the market's been very hot overall since 2013. That folks would have been feeling that the full brunt of those increases. Now there is a non-homestead cap of 10% as well for people that have investment properties or other types of properties.
Okay. That's good. Yeah, that definitely saves people because I could see that happening.
And that'll piggyback into our discussion going forward as we talk about rising property taxes and the discussion that's happening at the state level and otherwise. But in theory, the folks that have been feeling the increases in value and commensurate to that increases in their property taxes, the least are actually the long-term homesteaded properties because they're protected by the cap.
So another thing that's rising in the discussions is insurance costs.
Mm-hmm.
There has been some talk about property tax credits tied to rising insurance costs. Could you share how something like that might work if it was ever
and that was a concept that I put forward that you could create, and this is again is all part of this discussion on how we can lessen people's property tax burden And really, it's a larger. It's really more. It's an affordability issue that's larger than any single one thing, as we
Right.
know, whether it be the price of, you know, of a steak at the grocery store or
Eggs.
home insurance. I think eggs have come down a
They
little
come
bit.
down a
Yeah,
little
they've come
bit.
down a little bit, but just overall economic insecurity and being kind of squeezed and everywhere. Um, so what I proposed, absent, one of the things about this whole property tax reform, and I know we're going to get into it a little bit more later, um, is that all of those things have to be any kind of changes for the most part, major changes in terms of property tax reform have to be a constitutional amendment. So 60% of the
Yeah.
voters would have to approve that in the next election. One of the things I proposed was that the bigger issue really over the last few years has been property insurance increases. Now that has subsided a little bit, but remember when you talk about inflation or the cost of goods or the cost of insurance, you're only really measuring in terms of inflation how much it's going up going forward. It's not talking about once the cost is set. So if you talk about inflation coming down, yeah, but that's okay. But when it went up, the price was set higher. So the cost of insurance is still very high. It's not coming down as quickly as it went up. So there's still a lot of folks that are feeling that, and particularly, here where we were affected by two storms last year.
Yeah.
And I was having this discussion with my counterpart in Pinellas County. So ultimately, my thought was, what if you were to tie a property tax refund or rebate to the amount that your property insurance were to go up each year? Now, this is a program that could be piloted for say a 5-year period, monitored each year, and have a sunset, so that if property insurance were to come down or working or whatever it may be, I have a legislative background. I haven't been in the legislature for 8 years, so this would be a way to do this, and you could fund this through discretionary funds that the legislature has at the end of the year each year, that they fund any number of things, community projects, tax free holidays and those kinds of things. They have the money to do this. And what I would say is if your property taxes go up, say 15% or more in any given year, and you could tier it depending on how much it went up. If it spikes more than that, say it could be $500, $750, or $1,000, whatever it may be that you could apply for. It would more than make up for, and this is for homesteaded properties, it could more than make up your increase in property taxes, because based on a median home price of about $400,000 statewide, the average homeowner, if they're capped under the Save Our Homes cap with Homestead, they really only feel somewhere between $150 and $400 increase, and that 400 would be the high end in any given year, and usually spread out over 12 months in your escrow. So if you were getting say a $750 or $1,000 refund because your insurance went up, you would more than cover the increase in your property taxes plus a little bit extra that could go towards the increase in your insurance in any given year. It's received some traction. I talked to some folks in the legislature, including the budget chair on the House side. Received some traction. There's those, but I think there are ideas like that. Whether or not that's something that they would grab a hold of, I think there's some real ideas out there that they could do. That would just be something they could enact at the legislative level without having to do a constitutional amendment.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. I'm hoping we see that happen. No, it was from you.
Thank you.
Man. So let's talk about beyond property value increases. What are some of the biggest factors that can cause property taxes to rise year to year?
Well, probably the biggest, the one that we saw last year, was an increase in the millage rate or the tax rate, because there was a there was a ballot initiative that was passed in the last general election, to increase the millage for the school board here in Hillsborough County. So we've had a number of folks this year that said, well, wait a minute, the market has flattened or has slowed a bit. So when we received our notice of proposed taxes, we saw that our value either stayed the same or went down slightly, but our taxes still went up. How could that be? Well, there's two reasons. One is that the voters of Hillsborough County passed an increase in the millage rate for school board, for teacher pay or teacher retention. I think that was that's what the thing that they've sold it on. And the other is what's called a recapture. And the recapture for homesteaded properties says that, remember, as you build your cap, and the cap is related to as values of your property go up, your just value goes up over the course of time. If you're under the cap, your assessed value can't go up more than 3% or inflation, whichever is less. So over the course of time, you build a differential between your just market value and your assessed value. So the value is really up here in terms of how much it's worth from the standpoint of our assessment for property tax purposes. The amount that the homesteaded property owner is paying on is lower. So what the recapture does is, even if the property continues to rise, your assessed value can't go up more than 3% or inflation, whichever is less. If it stays flat or drops, it can still go up that 3% or inflation, whichever is less. That's the recapture. So you slightly recapture part of that cap in the years when it's flat or goes down. So we've had some questions about that. A lot of folks, including myself, lost a little bit of cap space in the recapture this year, even though the values were largely flat. And that's, an interesting thing that we saw this year for the first time since 2013 is that overall value in Hillsborough County was basically, very negligible increase or actually went down a little bit. And we also lost about $500 million in value, overall just value in Hillsborough County as a result of the storms last year. Now that over the course of time will come back up, come back onto the tax roll as people restore, replace, or renovate or fix their homes.
Yeah, that's good to know. You did talk about Save Our Homes. Can you explain the cap increases with Save Our Homes and why the homeowners see the jump despite that protection? Could it be
that's the recapture? And so I've kind of talked about that a little bit. And again, it's in state law. It's not something that we we have any control over. But the idea is, again, that your property value, if you're a capped property, your property value can stay flat or drop, but you've created this cap, so you're paying on an amount that's much lower than the actual value of your home over the course of time if you're a homesteaded property and you're under the Save Our Homes cap. And so that's the term recapture, because in essence the tax roll is recapturing some portion of that cap. Now, in theory, when the market goes back up, you'll regain that cap, in those years and subsequent years, and we'll see what happens going forward. Right now, we really can't forecast what the market's going to be next year. We're historians, for lack of a better term. Remember, we have an effective valuation date, which is January 1st. So when you receive your notice of proposed taxes and ultimately your tax bill in November, it's based on the previous January 1st. So as the property sat January 1st, that's so from that standpoint, we don't know yet. Although as we're kind of putting numbers together for next year, it appears as though the market still, and you realtors out there that are watching this and yourself know that still, sale prices and the inventory is up, sale prices are down. It's more of a buyer's market.
Yes.
And so we're probably anticipating a very similar type of year, until we see significant changes in interest rates and economic insecurity eases a little bit, and we figure out what the effect of tariffs and all the other stuff that's going on is going to be. The market has certainly corrected itself some.
Are there any certain property types or neighborhoods where taxable values have shifted, more, say, dramatically? And if so, what's driving that?
Well, I think that when you're seeing, so if we're talking about the rental market or the multifamily market, that we've seen that in the luxury market, the higher end properties, that those have continued to be fairly healthy. I think that otherwise we've seen, there's always certain neighborhoods that are more desirable than others. If you want to try to have your son or daughter in Plant High School in South Tampa, those markets, people will pay extra for those kinds of things. So that stayed fairly stable. But again, so from that standpoint, that those areas, the sort of the haves still have, and they're okay. But so I would say that, and I would say some of the fringe areas that are next to some of the areas that were hot over the course of the last few years. So if we know what's happened in, say, Tampa Heights near Armature Works and those near the urban core.
Yeah.
Some of those neighborhoods that are on the fringes of neighborhoods that have the properties have either revitalized, redeveloped, or that there's been significant development near there. Some of those properties are still, I think, those areas I would say would still be desirable for folks as they're looking to locate or relocate. But overall, the overall trend has been to, that people that it's slowed down a bit. I know that the industrial market that was very, very hot coming out of the pandemic, everybody wanted to have their toilet paper close to them.
Yeah.
That's changed. That's slowed quite a bit. And again, there's a lot of the land that was ready to be developed for industrial has already been developed. So now you're looking at different things. That has slowed a bit. The multifamily market, after the storms last year, interestingly enough, you saw there was a little bit of spike in terms of multifamily. But again, a lot of that had to do with folks that had to move out of their homes. Now they're back in, so that has kind of slowed a little bit. But that was a market that drove the multifamily market drove the overall tax roll for a period and increases in property value for a period coming out of the Great Recession, when people obviously either lost their homes, couldn't afford or couldn't qualify, and so there was a lot of that. Then so sort of all the interest and the money that kind of overbuilt that sector went there for a period of time. Then we saw that as the market started to cool over the last few years, that was the area that you saw sale prices really sort of going down because of there maybe theoretically, again, outside the luxury market, downtown, Water Street, those areas, that market kind of had slowed a bit. But overall, there's just been I think more of a reset in the real estate market. By no means is this, we saw a Great Recession or any of that, and I don't know that you can predict any of that stuff going forward. There's always predictions of doom and gloom. We'll see going forward what may happen in the overall economy. But I think still, overall, it's still, you get used to, when everybody was knocking it out of the park, and then when it kind of slows, it scares people.
Yes.
But we'll see how it goes going forward.
All right. With this whole new cooling off period that we're undergoing,
Right.
How does your office adjust assessments for the years beyond?
Well, again, you have to think of us as historians, for lack of a better term, because we base the tax roll based or the assessments are based on January 1st of a given year,
Right.
So largely based on the third, fourth quarter of the previous year, and we can't chase the market, and we have to base it on 100% of value of that January 1st. Now that's not to say we don't look at trends and we're not try to stay on top of that, and we're putting all that information in on a yearly basis. But it really, from that standpoint, we can't forecast, and at the same time we can't arbitrarily raise or lower people's assessments. There's no handshake. That's one of the reasons that we're constitutional officers and separate and apart from the taxing authorities. You don't want a particular county commissioner, city councilman, or mayor coming to us and say, hey, can you bump up this assessment with downtown so we can build a new stadium, or taxes are too high, can you arbitrarily lower your assessment? No, that's all kind of monitored by the Department of Revenue. We're highly regulated, and we have certain parameters by which we have to stay within, in order to have our tax roll pass every year.
That's good. And at that, Bob, we'll take a break.
Okay.
We'll be back live from Fabre Framework Studio, Bridging the Bay. We are back live at Fabre Framework Studio with Bridging the Bay. Bob, there's been growing discussion.
All right, here we go. I know where you're headed with this. Go on.
Oh, yes.
All right.
Those discussions in Tallahassee are about reducing or even eliminating property taxes or substantially changing how they're structured. From your perspective, what would be the practical impacts of such a change on county budgets, essential services, and the homeowners?
Well, there's a lot there. Um,
Yes.
so just to be clear, elimination of property tax or some portion would necessarily eliminate me. So I'm happy about that.
I'm glad.
Um, but so let me talk a little bit in the abstract first, and then let's
Okay.
talk about it in more concrete terms. So, from my legislative background, and just if people, I think people can understand this. Any big issue that you're dealing with, in this case, property taxes, and it may apply in this one more than any others or some others. But any major issue, property insurance, immigration at the national level, whatever it may be, it's always a confluence of three things: politics, policy, and practicality. And so, we'll kind of let me address each of those as I see them. Going forward. Now, the politics of this are fairly easy. I think anybody can understand that.
Yeah.
And I just was in a room of folks, yesterday. It seems like on a daily basis now. If I ask, everybody in there who wants to, who, if you never want to pay property taxes again the rest of your life, everybody's going to raise their hand, including myself. I get mad at myself once or twice a year, But so the politics of this, and I think the genesis of this are largely political. And let's be honest about it.
Right.
And about every 20 years, this came up. My friend that I served with, Marco Rubio, when he was Speaker of the House, and was looking to his next, thing that he aspired to be, brought this idea up, and it comes about every 20 years. The idea of reforming the system and/or eliminating property taxes altogether. This may be more serious than it's ever been in terms of a discussion, but again, I think largely it's still in the political realm, and you're seeing that. And to some extent, it's tied into the overall. Again, we've talked about economic insecurity, much higher insurance rates, and all these things that are, because remember, most homeowners pay their, they pay their mortgage in escrow, and it includes your insurance, includes your property taxes. So it's kind of all rolled together.
Yeah.
And then this overall, talk of that there's been so much more so much more value. Our assessments have gone up, so there's been more revenue to the local governments. Where is that money going? So there's this. So it's the tail wagging the dog that now we're talking about spending and how do we starve the beast, which is local government. So it's a lot going on here politically. So at that point, then you take it out of the political realm and you hand it to the policymakers, which are the legislature, that ultimately the governor will have something to do with, and everything we're talking about will end up being a constitutional amendment. So you got to
60%.
You got to get 60%. So that becomes political in that you have to manufacture the I guess synergy, the outrage to get this passed ultimately, and you're seeing that as well. So there's a lot going on. Policy-wise, the legislature is struggling with this because they've been handed this idea that's too good to be true for voters, which are mostly homesteaded property owners, which are the ones we've kind of morphed towards talking to. The original idea of doing away with property taxes altogether is not really on the table so much because people, I think, realize $60 billion of revenue to local governments to be able to, fund fire, police, schools, streets, all the things services that we know are necessary for the most part, and then people are used to. So now it's morphed towards just the homesteaded properties. But the policy of this is very difficult. And then ultimately, you can say that there's some wasteful spending out there. I think all of us can agree. I just, personally, I will tell you that our office was, we like to say Doge before Doge. We had 134 employees, now we have 90. We've cut the budget now going on 5 different times. And we're the most efficient property appraiser's office in the state when you triangulate between the number of employees, our budget, and the number of parcels that we have, 570,000. I say that, just so that folks are listening to this, we're doing a good job.
Yes.
I don't want the governor emblazing, in my in my stuff. But that's an aside. But again, the policy of this, and then how do you backfill some portion of that? Do you raise sales tax? There's all kinds of other ideas out there. Now, this idea that we're awash with money and that because we have all these, and that's true, but we also know that may not always be the case. Yes, the state has been incredibly profitable for a number of years, but you never really know. So the evil that we know is property taxes, in that it's reliable and somewhat stable. But at the same time, it's a worthy discussion of that we could reform the system. There's issues with the system, and we have to look at that going forward. But ultimately, if you do away with some portion, particularly, let's say, just the homesteaded properties, there's a deficit that's created there, and how are you going to backfill that? Raise the sales tax 8, 9, 10, 12%. Well, that's one way to do it. Do you create some other fee? There's been discussion about creating a one-time 5% fee on all real estate transactions. Don't know how well that will go over right now with the real estate market being somewhat flat. There's been even more crazy ideas that somehow you're going to, create a new license plate that people have to have on the front of their cars, like some other states. There's talking points. Well, we'd rather these Canadians, these nasty Canadians pay for it, or these people that visit will have more. But again, there's a balance of how much you can create revenue through these other sources. Again, we don't know. We have a 9/11, God forbid. We have a pandemic, God forbid, something else, something that a Great Recession. Now we're not generating the same number of tourists and other things. So I think there just has to be a balance there. I'm hopeful that there'll be real discussions, not just based on what is the best soundbite, what creates the most kind of furor out there. Because I think there is room, and there are ideas, and I've thrown out a number of those of property tax reform. And ultimately, this is not as much about the homesteaded property owners, particularly if you've been established there for a while, because those folks are protected by the Save Our Homes cap. And I can tell you, there are anecdotal stories that you're going to hear out there, and we know on all these kind of things, and we're going to go into it. Let's be honest. Yeah. This midterm election, your TV is going to be taken over by a bunch of, people like myself, politicians that are going to try to strike fear on one side or the other. Yeah. On one side, you're going to have people say, well, if you do this, then you're not going to be able to fund fire and police, right? And all those kinds of things. There's some merit to 60% of property taxes or so, depending on where you are, go to public safety. So that's an argument that can be made, but that's the one side. The other side is going to say, that people are being crushed by property taxes. Well, they're being crushed by the cost of eggs and bacon and insurance and everything else as well. The ones that are being crushed within the property tax system the least are homesteaded property owners, because they're protected by the cap. Now, if you've bought within the past couple years, particularly if it was 21 to 22, when we had a 24% increase in overall property value in Hillsborough County, you feel the reset, because remember, the previous owner, let's say they were there 15 years, they bought the house for $150,000, now it's worth $750,000. Yeah. When you buy it, the cap is going to reset to $750,000 minus any exemptions that you have, and you start from scratch. Well, your previous owner was paying $1,500 in taxes, wonderful, and now my tax bill got here, I get an escrow analysis, and I'm in the hole because my taxes went to $8,000. How did that happen? I didn't know. Nobody told me. That's the system. There's an inequity there. Yeah. So maybe we should deal more with first-time home buyers. If you're just coming out of college, you get your first job, and you want to follow the American dream, phase in the reset so they don't feel it all at one time. I've thrown that idea out there. Cool. I think there's merit in raising the homestead exemption to a higher level. Some people have said we could raise it to the median home price of around $400,000. You would, in essence, start with a cap of $400,000 on there. That would eliminate a lot of that would be a revenue hit, but at least it's more in line with if you had indexed the homestead exemption since its inception in the mid 1930s, it would be a much higher number than 50,000. That's an idea that's out there. I think that I'm in favor of allowing you to transfer your homestead to a child or to your so that way if you get older and because there are people that do that, they want to, the old days you still do that, you quit claim deed your home, or you sell your home at a reduced price to your child going forward. Why not be able to keep their homestead and the cap? I think that we could raise, on the other end, and we're not talking so much about, and there's also an issue of a tax shift here. Let's talk about non-homesteaded properties, renters. How something that helps them, because that's a pass-through. If you only deal with homesteaded properties, the non-homesteaded folks, if you have investment properties, you own homes that you rent out, it's not being addressed in this case. And so, maybe you lower the 10% non-homestead cap, or you do something, because otherwise any increases in property taxes that would be passed through to try to make up the loss in revenue at the local level, renters, it would exacerbate the issue we have with rental costs. I also think that we could raise the tangible personal property exemption to $100,000 from $25,000, which I think is far too low, particularly in an urbanized county like ours. That would help small and medium-sized businesses that are not really part of this discussion now. So I think there's some real ideas out there. I know a lot of stuff's being floated. We'll see what goes on the ballot. You could go too far and try to do away with taxes altogether. That's been tried in places like North Dakota, which is not exactly a bastion of progressive thought. And it fails on the ballot, and then politicians can throw up their hands and say, well, we tried. That's sort of what has always happened in this case. Or we can have a real contemplative discussion about policy changes that were sustainable, that could help lessen the tax burden on property owners of all types throughout the state, and something that's more sustainable into the future. Or we can only deal with the next election and how we get, score political points for whomever we want to be elected. There's somewhere in between is probably where we are. And I hope I haven't said anything that's going to get me in trouble or get removed from office. So
No.
Okay.
Oh.
And again, I think for me, that's always been my thing when I was in the legislature, throughout my public service, is to deal with things in a more realistic and practical manner. Maybe I'm a unicorn from that standpoint, but that's sort of what I am.
I like it.
All right.
I like it. I gotta make sure I ask some questions for our realtors.
All right.
Yeah, I gotta make sure I ask some questions for them. So for the realtors,
and I will say this for the realtors that are listening, because I know this is a tricky issue for you on a personal level. I think you probably look at it the same way that I may have just described it. On the business, from the business level, you're saying the market's flat. We need something to get this thing going. I would submit to you that this may or may not be a boost. I don't think it's guaranteed that it would be, and that it may be short term, in that if you can't fund public services to the point that it makes a place to still be desirable, that it could have long-term effects on the market that wouldn't necessarily be positive as well. So I would just think to keep an open mind as to, where this discussion goes and what ultimately is good for the overall economy in the state and overall real estate market, and not just jump behind an idea, again, that may not be practical nor feasible, nor just, only political in nature.
Yes. I have to remember that. I'm going to take those 3 Ps. I like that.
Yes. Well, and it really is. I mean, and this one, the practicality part is the real part to wrestle with, because ultimately we're talking, we only have 2 large, revenue sources of the state: sales tax and property taxes. And so, and local, and every place is different. Every city is different. So homestead exemption being, if you're dealing with homesteaded properties in a bedroom community like Temple Terrace, it's going to have more of an effect than it would in, say, some other cities, maybe even a larger city like the city of Tampa, because we have a more diverse property tax roll, or in a large county. Small counties, it may really destroy them in terms of their revenue. So have to keep that in mind. Let's talk realtors.
All right, let's talk realtors. What's the most important thing they should explain about how property taxes may change after a purchase to their clients?
The most important thing they must explain, well, I think we've kind of touched on it, is if you're talking about a single family home, so if it's new construction, it's one thing. So in theory, you're paying, in the year before it's put on the tax roll, or substantially complete, i.e. CO'd, that you only pay on the land is all the value, right? So that's a little bit different. But let's say you're buying an existing home, and you have to really look. Don't look necessarily at an assessment that may be on Zillow or someplace else, or some tax estimate from that. Remember, depending on how long the previous owner had the home, if it was homesteaded, they were paying on a value that's much lower than the actual just or market value. based on the way that the property tax system works in Florida, and that's, part of this discussion of reform. Once you purchase that home, the just or market value will reset to the actual just or market value. I'm sorry, the assessed value will reset. And at that point, minus any exemptions that you have, you'll start from scratch with your own cap. Now you can also port, if you're coming from a homesteaded property previously, you have the remainder of the year that you abandoned your homestead or sold the home and 2 subsequent years to port. Now that, again, that differential between your just or market value and your Save Our Homes cap value, that assessed value, there's a portion there up to $500,000 if you're upsizing, dollar for dollar, or a percentage if you're downsizing, to apply that to the new home to lower the initial taxable value on the new property. And so that allows you that gives you somewhat of a break if you're coming from a previous homestead. But you have to be warned that you're going to that cap is going to reset, and so yes, your taxable value will go up in that subsequent year after you purchase the property if you homestead it, or if you don't homestead it. Either way, if it's non-homesteaded. Now, there's a non-homestead cap at 10% as well, but that's not transferable and not portable. But that's probably the biggest thing that people need to know. And the other thing that I think that people need to know is remember that from the purposes of the property appraiser's office and our notice of proposed taxes, it's only dealing with the property tax portion, the real estate portion of your tax bill. There are things that go on your ultimate tax bill that are not property tax related. So garbage fees, stormwater fees, special districts that you may live in, any number of other things that are on your tax bill that you pay to your local municipality, city, county, and otherwise, that you may receive. Some people say, well, I received my notice of proposed taxes and it says that my taxes are going to be $3,500, but then I got my tax bill in November and it was $4,500. It doesn't make sense. Well, if you look at it, the real estate portion may have been $3,500, but then there's $1,000 of other fees and taxes that are on top of that. Interestingly enough, I was with the mayor of Temple Terrace and we talked about that. And he said, one of the ideas that I had to try to lower the tax bills for the residents of Temple Terrace was to, and this kind of again speaks to this whole discussion we're having, was that we would cut down the garbage pickup to once a week instead of twice, and that way when we negotiate our garbage contract, it would be cheaper for the residents. And you can imagine that the residents were like, no way.
No.
Right? So that's interesting too, because people kind of, in this world today, we all kind of want our cake and eat it too. So we want all the services, but and this concept that you're renting your home for the government, all that, you do pay for services now. How much should we be paying is a whole other question, not one that we have anything to do with. But that's the conundrum here, right? Yeah. And I asked a group of actually realtors the other day when I met with them, and I said, just if you kind of personalize the issue, I said, let's say going forward, in a growing area and you're slated to get a new fire station or whatever. Let's say that the response time is whatever it is that is the acceptable amount of response time for an emergency vehicle for a fire, or if you're having a medical emergency. And I don't know, just spitballing. Let's say it's 6 minutes. Okay. Over the course of time with traffic and growth and everything else, it's slated that you're going to get a new fire station in your area that's going to keep that response time. Otherwise, it's going to go up to 8, 10, 12 minutes. Is that acceptable? We're like, well, a lot can happen in 6 minutes in a fire or a medical emergency. Those are the kinds of things that we really need to talk about, and also realize that the cost of living for each of us has gone up significantly. Yes. The cost of doing business for businesses has gone up significantly. Yes. With insurance costs, healthcare costs, all the things that we know. That doesn't not apply in the government sector. Now, there's some balance there, and there are areas that we can look for some wasteful spending, but ultimately, the fixed costs that are in government, like salaries to keep and retain good people, retirement, which generally you have better retirement systems in at least in theory, in government, because the salaries are a little bit lower. Those have continued to rise. Insurance costs. So there's a balance, and again, you can get the political hit by just throwing it out there, but we have to look a little bit under the hood and be a little bit deeper on all those kinds of things. And again, there aren't discussions that I'm intimately involved in anymore, but I would hope that there will be some of those going forward. But I think those are the two things that I think are the most important: the reset for new home buyers, so they really know what they're facing, and also the idea that, remember, that don't just look at the real estate portion of it. Look at, I would take a look at the actual tax bill of the previous owners to see all the things that are tacked on at the end.
Yes. How can realtors best use the tools and resources from your office to help clients understand their tax obligations?
Well, I mean, our website is, I think, has been, humbly speaking, it's one of the better government websites, public-facing websites anywhere. There's a lot of resources in there, from our tax estimator if you're trying to figure out what the tax hit may be. If you need a closer number, you can get with us. We'll issue you a letter with a little bit more research. It won't be perfect, but it's going to be closer than the estimator. From that standpoint, that's important for realtors to know. Contact us with any information, any way that we can help. We're excited to come out to speak to. I do it almost on a weekly basis to different realtors and realtor associations and individual offices, both personally about the system, how it works, and also to have our IT folks come out and present the website. We're constantly trying to make improvements on that. We're still working on it, but we've initiated putting permits on there. I think that's a big deal for realtors as well. So just know that we're a resource in any way possible for folks, both in the public and obviously, folks that are in the business of trying to assist and make you as successful as possible.
Looking ahead in the future, are there any innovations or transparency initiatives you're working on right now that realtors and property owners should know about?
Well, we talked a little bit about the idea of having a more robust tax estimator that would be part of the sale process.
Yes.
That would be presented so that the buyers would actually know what ultimately the hit's going to be. That's something there's been a bill the last couple of years, because again, there's a lot of different folks out there, whether it be Zillow or some other places where people look at things and it may not get the actual numbers. I think putting as much information out there. We'd like to have a more robust sales platform so people can go in and do some of their own research in terms of comparables and things like that on our website. That I think is good. And the other area that I think that folks that we've endeavored and we will continue to do is put more information on the website of how to deal with an issue if you have a catastrophic event. Like the storms last year or something like that. Where do they go to get the resources, and what happens as a result of that in terms of their value, possible refunds they can receive if the home's uninhabitable, and those kinds of things as well. Plus, then dealing with the federal level of the FEMA 50% rule and other things as well that people may have to deal with. Hopefully, we'll have a couple of years without storms and won't have to deal with it, but it's out there.
Yes, I hope so. Well, that wraps up today's episode of Bridging the Bay. A big thank you to our guest, Bob Henriquez. Thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Yes, helping us better understand the property tax process here in Hillsborough County. And if you found value in this conversation, be sure to subscribe, follow, and share the podcast. And stay tuned for further episodes where we continue bridging the gap between real estate, government, and the communities we serve. Until next time, I'm Quan Rimmer. Thank you for listening. And remember, when we bridge the bay, we bring the community closer.